Before you meet your soulmate, there is something most people never expect to happen because they think love begins when two people finally meet each other, but heaven works differently than that, and what God often does before bringing someone into your life is something so deep, so quiet, and so powerful that at first it does not even feel like preparation. It feels like confusion, it feels like loss, it feels like delay, it feels like doors closing instead of opening. And if you are in that season right now where relationships are not working out, where people are disappearing from your life, where your heart feels like it is being stretched in ways you cannot explain, then this message is not random and it is not coincidence, because before God connects two souls, He first transforms one soul at a time. And the reason this transformation feels uncomfortable is because God is not preparing you for temporary attention, He is preparing you for permanent connection, and permanent connection requires a different version of you than the one that existed before. So what you are experiencing right now is not rejection, it is redirection. It is not loneliness, it is alignment. It is not punishment, it is protection, because the truth most people never realize is that God does not send your soulmate into your life while you are still carrying the emotional weight of your past relationships, your fears, your insecurities, your doubts, and your old identity. He first begins changing something inside you so quietly that even you sometimes cannot recognize the process until one day you wake up and realize that the things you once chased no longer attract you, the people you once depended on no longer control your peace, and the situations that once hurt you no longer define your confidence. And that is when heaven knows you are becoming ready, not perfect but ready, not finished but aligned, not complete but prepared, because soulmate connections are not built on desperation, they are built on spiritual readiness. And readiness begins when God removes everything inside you that cannot survive the relationship He is preparing to send into your life. And this is why some of the hardest seasons you have experienced were never meant to break you, they were meant to rebuild you into someone strong enough, emotionally steady enough, spiritually mature enough, and internally secure enough to receive a love that does not confuse you, does not manipulate you, does not disappear on you, and does not leave you questioning your worth, because the love God prepares for you is not meant to heal your identity, it is meant to match your identity. And that is exactly why before your soulmate appears, God begins changing the way you see yourself, the way you see relationships, and the way you see your future, because you cannot enter a divine connection with a temporary mindset. And many people misunderstand this season because they think something is wrong with them, when in reality something powerful is happening within them. And what is happening within you right now is not random timing, it is divine timing, because God knows that if He sends the right person into your life before your heart is ready, you might misunderstand them, you might push them away, or worse, you might not even recognize them when they finally arrive. And that is why heaven sometimes delays what your heart desires, not to deny it but to prepare you for it, because preparation always comes before connection, and transformation always comes before recognition. And the strongest soulmate relationships are not created when two people find each other quickly, they are created when two people are shaped separately first, so that when they finally meet they recognize each other, not just emotionally but spiritually. And if you look honestly at your life right now, you will begin to notice that something inside you has already started changing, because the conversations you once tolerated now feel exhausting, the attention you once chased now feels empty, the approval you once depended on now feels unnecessary, and the silence that once scared you now feels peaceful. And that is not accidental, that is alignment, because God begins preparing you for your soulmate by teaching you how to be comfortable with yourself first. And once you become comfortable with yourself, you stop accepting relationships that make you uncomfortable with who you are. And this is one of the clearest signs that Heaven is preparing something different for your future. Because real soulmate connections are never built on pretending to be someone else, they are built on being fully accepted as who you already are. And the reason God begins this transformation before your soulmate arrives is because He wants you to enter that relationship from a place of strength instead of insecurity, from a place of clarity instead of confusion, and from a place of purpose instead of desperation. And what most people never understand is that desperation attracts lessons, but purpose attracts alignment. And the moment your heart shifts from chasing love to trusting God with love, something begins changing inside you that quietly moves your future closer to the connection you have been waiting for. Because heaven does not respond to panic, it responds to preparation. And the preparation season you are in right now is not meant to make sense to everyone around you, because some people will look at your life and assume nothing is happening, while in reality everything is happening beneath the surface. Because transformation always begins invisibly before it becomes visible, and this invisible transformation is exactly what prepares your heart to recognize someone who is meant to stay instead of someone who is only meant to pass through your life temporarily. And one of the clearest signs God is changing something inside you before your soulmate arrives is that He begins removing people who once felt important but were never meant to be permanent. And even though that removal feels painful at first, it creates space for something real to enter later, because your future connection cannot grow in a space that is already filled with emotional confusion and spiritual distraction. And sometimes God protects your future relationship by removing your past attachments first, and even though that process feels lonely, it is actually one of the strongest signs that something meaningful is being prepared ahead of you, because heaven never clears space without planning to fill it with something better. And what makes this preparation season difficult is that you cannot always see what God is doing while He is doing it, but one day you will look back and realize that every closed door, every unexpected ending, every delayed relationship, and every quiet season was not meant to hurt you. It was meant to position you exactly where you needed to be before the right person entered your life at the right time for the right reasons. And when that moment finally arrives, you will not meet them as the same person you used to be. You will meet them as someone stronger, calmer, wiser, and more certain about what you deserve and what you are no longer willing to accept. Because before your soulmate appears, God changes something inside you that teaches you how to recognize the difference between attention and intention, between attraction and alignment, and between temporary connection and permanent purpose. And once you learn that difference, everything about the way you experience love begins to change in ways that quietly prepare your heart for the relationship heaven has already started preparing for you even before you realized it. There is a moment in your life that most people never recognize while they are living through it, because it does not look like a miracle, and it does not feel like progress, and it certainly does not feel like preparation. But heaven calls this moment transformation, and the reason it feels uncomfortable is because God is not changing your circumstances first, He is changing your spirit first. And when God begins changing your spirit, it always feels confusing before it feels clear, and it always feels lonely before it feels purposeful, and it always feels slow before it becomes powerful. Because what God is doing inside you right now is not meant to impress people around you, it is meant to prepare you for the one person who will walk into your life and recognize the version of you that only heaven could create. And that is why lately you have felt different in ways you cannot explain, and you have started losing interest in conversations that once excited you, and you have started walking away From situations you once tolerated, and you have started protecting your peace in ways that even surprise you, because this is the quiet evidence that something inside you is being reshaped by God's hands. And sometimes transformation does not feel like growth, it feels like separation, it feels like silence, it feels like waiting longer than you expected. But what you must understand is that God never prepares two people for each other at different speeds. He always works on both hearts at the same time, even when they are miles apart, even when they have never met, even when they do not yet know each other's names. Heaven is already aligning their journeys, and while you are wondering why certain doors closed and certain people disappeared and certain plans failed, God was already removing distractions that would have delayed your future connection, because the person He is preparing for you will not match the version of you that existed last year. They will match the version of you that is being formed right now. And this is why your patience is not punishment, it is protection, and your waiting season is not empty, it is sacred, because God is teaching your heart how to recognize the difference between attention and intention, and between attraction and alignment, and between temporary comfort and eternal partnership. And the more your spirit learns these differences, the closer you move toward the relationship that Heaven designed specifically for you. And maybe this explains why your standards have quietly changed without you even trying, and maybe this explains why you no longer feel the need to chase connections that once felt urgent, and maybe this explains why your heart has started choosing peace over excitement, because when God prepares someone for your life, He first prepares your heart to stop settling for what looks good and start waiting for what is truly meant for you. And there is something powerful about the moment when your soul begins to value alignment more than approval, because that is the moment Heaven knows you are almost ready to meet the person who will understand you without explanation, and respect you without conditions, and support you without confusion. And sometimes before that person arrives, God allows a season where everything feels uncertain, not because He forgot about your future, but because He is strengthening your faith, so that when your blessing finally appears, you will recognize it without fear and accept it without hesitation, and trust it without doubt, because the greatest relationships that God creates are not rushed connections, they are revealed connections. And revelation always requires preparation, and preparation always requires patience, and patience always produces clarity, and clarity always protects your future. And that is why your life lately may feel quieter than before, because God often removes noise before He introduces destiny, and He often removes confusion before He reveals connection, and He often removes distractions before He sends direction. And the silence you feel right now is not absence, it is alignment happening behind the scenes. And one day, very soon, you will look back at this exact season of your life and realize that what felt like delay was actually design, and what felt like distance was actually direction, and what felt like loneliness was actually preparation for the one connection that will not require pretending or chasing or proving. Because when two people finally meet at the exact moment God planned, their spirits recognize something familiar even before their minds understand it, and that recognition feels peaceful instead of complicated, and natural instead of forced, and steady instead of uncertain, because real alignment never creates confusion, it creates clarity, and real connection never creates anxiety, it creates security, and real love never creates pressure, it creates peace. And that peace begins forming inside you long before the person arrives, because Heaven always prepares the heart before revealing the relationship. And if your heart has started changing lately, if your priorities have started shifting lately, if your expectations have started rising lately, then this is not coincidence, this is confirmation that God is already moving your life closer to the moment your story and their story finally meet exactly where they were always meant to begin together. There is a moment in your life that feels confusing at first but later becomes one of the clearest signs that God is preparing your heart for something sacred, because suddenly the things that once satisfied you stop feeling right anymore, and the conversations that once excited you start feeling empty, and the attention you once chased no longer feels valuable, and you begin wondering what is happening inside you. But what you don't realize yet is that heaven is quietly changing your priorities. Before introducing you to the person who will share your destiny, because God never sends your soulmate into a version of you that is still searching for validation from the wrong places, and that uncomfortable shift you feel right now is not loneliness, it is alignment. And while it may feel like something is being taken away from you, the truth is something far greater is being prepared for you behind the scenes, and many people misunderstand this stage because they think distance means rejection, when in reality distance often means protection and purification and positioning. And this is the season where God slowly teaches your heart how to recognize peace instead of confusion, and loyalty instead of chaos, and depth instead of surface attraction, because your soulmate will not arrive as another lesson, they will arrive as confirmation. And before confirmation comes preparation, and before preparation comes separation. And yes, separation can feel painful, but sometimes God removes people from your life not because they were bad but because they were temporary, and temporary people cannot walk beside you into permanent promises. And the reason this process feels heavy is because your spirit is learning how to release what your emotions were trying to hold on to, and that is never easy, but it is always necessary. And right now, even if you cannot see it clearly, something inside you is becoming stronger, quieter, wiser, and more patient. And patience is not weakness, it is evidence that your heart is being trained to recognize what is real instead of what is immediate. And many times God delays the meeting not because the connection is far away, but because the timing must be perfect, not only around you but inside you. Because when your soulmate finally enters your life, they will not arrive to complete you, they will arrive to walk beside the person God has already been building inside you. And that is why this season feels like growth instead of romance, and reflection instead of excitement, and silence instead of clarity, because heaven is shaping your expectations so that when the right person appears you will recognize them not through pressure but through peace, and not through urgency but through certainty, and not through fear but through faith. And there will come a moment soon when you realize that the waiting you once questioned was actually protection you once needed, and the prayers you thought were unanswered were actually being prepared for a greater answer than you imagined. And the version of you that once accepted confusion will no longer exist, because God is replacing uncertainty with discernment, and insecurity with confidence, and fear with trust. And the most powerful transformation happening right now is not around you, it is inside you, because God is teaching your heart how to recognize the difference between attention and intention. And once you learn that difference, everything begins to change. And suddenly you stop chasing what looks right and start trusting what feels peaceful. And that peace is not accidental, it is the quiet signal that your life is being aligned with someone who is also being prepared somewhere else at this very moment, even if you have never met them yet. And the reason this truth feels so deep in your spirit is because your soul already understands what your eyes have not seen yet. And sometimes the strongest evidence that something beautiful is coming is the way God begins reshaping your heart before it arrives. Sparkles, because destiny is never rushed, and divine connections are never random, and the person meant for you is not being delayed, they are being prepared just like you are being prepared right now. There is a moment in your life when you start noticing that the things which once excited you no longer satisfy your spirit anymore, and it feels confusing at first because nothing around you looks different, but something inside you has clearly changed. And this is not an accident, because before God allows two destinies to connect, He first reshapes the inner world of both people so they can recognize each other not just with their eyes but with their spirit. And that is why recently you may have started walking away from conversations that once entertained you, friendships that once distracted you, and habits that once filled your empty evenings, because your heart is no longer searching for noise, it is searching for alignment. And what you thought was loneliness was actually preparation, because when God prepares you for the person He designed specifically for your soul, He removes the appetite for temporary connections so you don't mistake comfort for covenant. And sometimes this season feels heavy because it looks like everyone else is moving forward while you are standing still, but heaven is not slowing you down, it is positioning you carefully like a craftsman adjusting the final pieces of something rare and sacred that cannot be rushed. And what many people don't realize is that meeting the right person is never just about timing on a calendar, it is about timing inside your character, because if the meeting happened earlier, you might have misunderstood them, overlooked them, or even walked away from them simply because you were not yet the version of yourself that could recognize what God was sending into your life. And this is why lately you feel a strange pull toward growth even when nobody is watching you change, because God is quietly preparing your heart to hold a love that will not confuse you, compete with you, or weaken your purpose, but instead strengthen your faith and multiply your peace. And the truth is, before divine love enters your life, God begins teaching you how to stand alone without feeling abandoned, so that when the right person finally appears, you will not cling to them out of fear but walk beside them with strength and confidence and dignity. And maybe this explains why certain doors closed recently without warning and certain people stopped understanding you the way they used to, because heaven was protecting your future connection by clearing away anything that could interfere with it. And although it felt painful at the time, you will later realize that every ending you experienced during this season was actually a silent redirection designed to make space for someone whose presence will feel like clarity instead of confusion, and peace instead of pressure, and alignment instead of uncertainty. Because when God writes a connection into your story, He never builds it on insecurity, He builds it on transformation. And right now, whether you realize it or not, transformation is already happening inside you in ways that cannot be reversed. And that is why your standards are rising, your patience is growing, and your spirit is becoming more selective about who is allowed close to your heart. Because God is not preparing you for just any relationship, He is preparing you for a partnership that will carry purpose, healing, and destiny together. And sometimes during this process you may wonder why the waiting feels longer than expected, but what you cannot see yet is that the same preparation happening inside you is also happening inside the person who is meant to meet you. And heaven never rushes a meeting that must last a lifetime, because when two prepared hearts finally recognize each other, the connection feels different from anything they have ever experienced before. It feels steady instead of chaotic, safe instead of uncertain, and guided instead of forced. And that is why your current season is not empty, even though it sometimes feels quiet, because silence is often the language God uses when He is building something sacred behind the scenes. And one day, very soon, you will look back at this exact chapter of your life and realize that what you thought was delay was actually protection, and what you thought was isolation was actually preparation, and what you thought was waiting was actually positioning. Because before God allows two souls to walk toward each other, He first teaches them how to walk with Him red heart. And when that lesson is complete, nothing on earth can stop what Heaven has already decided for you, sparkles, and that is why even now, without realizing it, you are moving closer step by step toward a meeting that has been planned longer than you have been alive. And when that moment finally arrives, you will understand that every change inside you during this season was never random. It was intentional, necessary, and perfectly timed by God Himself. There is a moment in every chosen person's life when they suddenly look back and realize that nothing they cried about was ever wasted, because the silence they once called loneliness was actually preparation, the closed doors they once called rejection were actually protection, and the waiting they once called punishment was actually alignment. And right now, if you feel like life has been rearranging itself in confusing ways that don't make sense yet, that is often the exact season when God begins shaping your heart so it can recognize the person He already prepared for you long before you even knew their name, because divine love is never rushed and never random. It is intentional and timed with precision that goes beyond what your emotions can currently understand. And sometimes God removes people not because they were bad but because they were temporary. Not because they hurt you but because they could not carry the future He designed for you. And the reason this season feels different from your past waiting seasons is because something inside you is quietly changing. Your standards are changing, your patience is changing, your ability to walk away from what is wrong is changing, and these are not accidents. They are signals that heaven is preparing your life for a connection that will not require you to shrink yourself just to be accepted. Because when God prepares your future spouse, He also prepares your mindset so you will not sabotage what you once prayed for. And maybe that is why conversations that once excited you now feel empty. Maybe that is why certain friendships are fading without explanation. Maybe that is why your heart is becoming more selective and your spirit more sensitive. Because when the right person is getting closer, God begins teaching you how to recognize peace instead of confusion and clarity instead of chaos and purpose instead of pressure. And the truth is, the right relationship will never feel like a performance you have to maintain every day just to keep someone interested. It will feel like alignment that strengthens your faith instead of distracting from it. And if you have been wondering why your life has slowed down while everyone around you seems to be moving ahead faster, it is often because God is not writing your story based on comparison but on calling. And the person meant for you is not someone you have to chase across confusion but someone who will meet you in the middle of obedience. And sometimes, before that meeting happens, God allows a quiet season so your heart can detach from the idea of forcing love and begin trusting the process of receiving it, because forced connections fade but prepared connections remain strong even through distance, time, and uncertainty. And there are people watching this right now who think they missed their chance at love because something ended unexpectedly. But what ended was not your future, it was your rehearsal for recognizing your future. And when the right person finally steps into your life, you will not feel rushed to prove your worth because they will already see it. You will not feel anxious about being replaced because they will already value your presence. And you will not feel confused about where you stand because their intentions will match their actions. And that kind of connection only arrives after God finishes teaching both hearts how to choose purpose over impulse and commitment over convenience. So if this season has been stretching your patience and testing your faith, it is not because you are forgotten, it is because you are being positioned. And the same God who protected you from what could not stay is also guiding you toward what cannot miss you. And sometimes the strongest evidence that something real is coming is the way your spirit begins to feel calm even before anything changes physically. Because peace is often the first sign that heaven has already started moving things behind the scenes in your favor even when you cannot see it yet, and one day very soon you are going to understand why God asked you to wait a little longer, trust a little deeper, and let go a little earlier than you wanted, because the love He prepares does not arrive to confuse your heart but to confirm everything He has been quietly doing inside you all along. Have you ever noticed that right before God brings the right person into your life, He begins to remove your need to be understood by everyone else first, because what He is preparing is not just a relationship but a divine alignment that will only make sense when the timing is complete. And this season you are walking through right now, where conversations feel quieter, connections feel fewer, and your heart feels like it is being stretched in silence, is not loneliness but preparation, because God is slowly teaching your spirit how to recognize peace instead of excitement, how to value purpose instead of attention, and how to choose covenant instead of comfort. So when your future spouse finally steps into your life, you will not mistake them for someone temporary or chase them with fear, but receive them with clarity and confidence. And this is why lately certain people stopped responding the same way, certain friendships began fading without explanation, and certain opportunities that once looked promising suddenly closed without warning, because God is not punishing you, He is protecting the version of you that your future partner is going to meet. And He knows that if He allowed you to stay attached to what felt familiar, you would never be ready for what is destined. And sometimes preparation feels like delay, because heaven is working in places your eyes cannot see yet. While you are wondering why nothing seems to be changing, God is quietly rearranging the emotional patterns inside your heart, teaching you patience where you once reacted quickly, teaching you discernment where you once trusted too easily, and teaching you strength where you once depended on people who were never meant to stay. And this transformation is sacred even when it feels uncomfortable, because the love that God is preparing for you will not be built on confusion or insecurity, but on peace, clarity, trust, and spiritual agreement. And that kind of love requires a different version of you than the one you used to be, which is why lately you may feel like you are outgrowing environments, conversations, and even expectations that once defined your life, because God is expanding your vision so that when the right person arrives, you will recognize them not by how strongly they impress you but by how deeply they align with the peace God already planted inside you. And the truth is, the right relationship will never compete with your purpose, it will confirm it. It will never distract your calling, it will strengthen it, and it will never make you question your worth, because it will be built on the understanding that both of you were prepared separately before being connected intentionally. And right now, while you are waiting, heaven is shaping both stories at the same time. Even though you cannot see their journey, God is working in their heart just like He is working in yours, removing fears they once carried, healing wounds they once hid, and teaching them the same patience that He is teaching you, so that when your paths finally cross, it will not feel forced, it will feel familiar, like something your spirit has already been prepared to recognize. And this is why you must not rush this season, even when the silence feels long, even when the waiting feels heavy, even when it seems like everyone around you is moving forward faster than you, because what God is building for you is not temporary excitement but lasting alignment. And alignment takes time, because it is not created by chance, it is created by purpose, and purpose always moves according to heaven's timing, not human expectation. And sometimes God allows you to walk through seasons where nothing appears to be happening, so that you learn to trust Him without visible proof, because the relationship He is preparing will require faith, not just feelings, and trust, not just attraction. And the strength you are developing right now is the foundation that will hold that future together when challenges come, because even the right relationship will still face Storms, but when God is the author of your connection, storms do not destroy the bond, they deepen it. And right now God is teaching you how to stand strong emotionally, spiritually and mentally, so that when love finally arrives you will not carry old fears into a new promise. And this is why certain doors had to close, this is why certain people had to leave, and this is why certain plans had to change, because God is clearing the path ahead of you even when you cannot yet see where it leads. And one day very soon you will look back at this exact season and realize that what felt like waiting was actually positioning, what felt like silence was actually protection, and what felt like loss was actually preparation for something greater than anything you could have planned on your own. And when that moment finally comes, when the right person stands in front of you and everything begins to make sense, you will understand why God asked you to trust Him through the uncertainty, because He was not delaying your blessing, He was designing it perfectly for the exact version of you that would be ready to receive it without fear, without doubt, and without hesitation. And that is why this season matters more than you think right now, because heaven is not just preparing someone for you, it is preparing you for them.